This is kicking off the UTA Truck Talk Podcast number 7, and we have Chris Visser with JD Power is our guest today, and we're going to have him share a little bit about his background and his company, and then what his forecast is for the 2026 marketing year. So, Chris, with that, welcome, and why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me. So I'll give you the shortest version possible of what we do. So I started just about 29 years ago working for, at the time, the NADA Used Car Guide and specifically the Commercial Truck Guide, which was affiliated with ATD, American Truck Dealers. Fast forward about 16, 17 years, NADA Used Vehicle Valuation Division was purchased by JD Power in 2015. So I just went along with that division, which meant that I was working for JD Power from that point on. And a few years later, JD Power also purchased the specialty equipment valuation division of, at the time it was a freestanding company called NADA Guides, or National Appraisal Guides, and they did power sports, marine, RV, manufactured housing values. So that got wrapped into the JD Power company as well. And a few years ago, I was asked to lead that team also. So at this point, I'm doing the commercial truck market analysis and valuations, and also overseeing the team that does the fun stuff, the specialty values. But I'm still the primary market analyst for commercial trucks, especially the heavier, medium, and Class 8 trucks. So I still see the sales data come in from various sources, process it, and decide what the value should be for the next update. And I'm not sure how far we want to get into this, but our main bread and butter on the JD Power valuation side is published values that are available on online in apps, APIs, and things like that. They're basically used by insurance companies, dealers, finance officials, finance companies, anybody else who has vested interest in the value of a used truck at any point in time. So we've been UTA members since day one. I think I joined the UTA in 99, and I went to the first convention in 2000. And have made it to every convention except for one. One year we took my dad to Vegas for a milestone birthday, but other than that, I've been to every one. We used to exhibit. We stopped exhibiting, I think, around 2018, 2019 or so, okay. But we still attend. Yeah, get a lot out of it. The UTA convention has changed a lot, not just in size, but also in structure and the way it's organized. And I think they nailed it now. It's a well-oiled machine. I think it's perfectly organized with the right amount of content, just the right amount of a couple hours here and there of, free, so you can actually get some work done, and then meet back up for social events afterwards. And the trade show is really nicely done too. I wish every trade show would bring the food and beverages onto the trade show floor, because you get everybody there. And it's concise. Nicely done.
No, we definitely appreciate your feedback on that. That's a good thing to share with our listeners as well. So you have definitely seen an evolution of changes over the number of years with the different formats, and so I would agree. I think we're on top of it now, and it does provide some flexibility that allows for just some good networking, but also to get some work done if you need to too. Yep. Going back to a little bit about what you'd mentioned before, I think there's a lot of credibility in you mentioning who you support with your numbers and your facts, so whether it's the insurance companies, that kind of thing. Where do you derive these values from? How do you accumulate the history? Both probably you got to keep it pretty recent, right? I mean, you can't get this truck market changes so much. 3 months down the road, it's already history, right? So how do you accumulate that data and compile it?
Yeah, so we get a couple of main sources. One, obviously, we have to look at the auctions, specifically the largest nationwide no reserve auctions that everybody goes to and knows about. That's where the majority of trucks are auctioned. So we get data from those, either from a feed from one of them or some manual, processing from another one. Then we look at some other secondary auctions as well and roll that into an ongoing database we have of auction results. And just as an aside, the monthly market update that we put out for free to the industry references that auction data and just a little sliver of that based on one benchmark truck that we look at. On the retail side, we have a network of about 500 dealers across the country who submit sales to us on a monthly basis, and they also include some wholesale sales in there. So roughly for every one truck that's wholesale, they'll retail about 5 trucks, so about a 1 to 5 ratio of wholesale to retail reports directly from the dealers. And that's franchised and independent. And then we also work with all the OEMs. So all the OEMs who have used truck outlets send us that data as well. And we also work with the finance companies within the captive finance companies within the OEMs to get their data too. So we got a pretty good cross section of sales across the country. I'd say the data we value most is the retail data from the dealers because that's the most detailed data that we get. It's also the most trustworthy, and it doesn't require a lot of background follow-up to see, why there's a disparity in selling prices or something like that. On the auction side, it's great to get a ton of data, but unless you actually saw the truck go through and know the entire story, or at least read the description, which can be, kind of tough to obtain sometimes, you're not necessarily getting the full picture on that truck. So those are our main sources of data. After we do that, we have some processing that we can use that obviously eliminates outliers and does some very simple statistical cleaning and processing. We have different ways we can look at different segments. We can throw some of it into Tableau just for visualization's sake. We use Excel for a lot of stuff still. We have, I've built this database up. Actually, the current structure of the database and the inputs, outputs, were put together in 2007. So we've really just been adding to that each month since then. So a lot of it is just done in Excel still.
Are you crushing it with AI yet? Have you worked on any platforms like that?
Yeah, we actually working pretty nicely with AI in some capacities on the specialty side, power sports and marine and RV. As far as, data collection and processing goes, commercial trucks, not so much yet. Haven't implemented those tools to commercial trucks just yet. Okay. I think part of the problem, and and anybody else who's done any market analysis knows, if you're talking, on the used, you'd be amazed what we can do, what JD Power does on the light truck side and used car side, because they have so much data, exponentially more data than we get on the commercial truck side, that you can just do all sorts of modeling and predictive forecasting and things like that using AI or not using AI. Because they have so much data that's homogeneous and doesn't, each data point doesn't have a story attached to it. Contrast that with like a Class 8 market study where you can have an identical year, make, model, mileage, spec truck, and the selling price can be wildly different. And, there's no rational reason why. Sure, you can say maybe it was regionality, but, at the end of the day, there's going to be questions that a model can't answer for that. So that's a long way of saying that, a lot of the modeling that, we might be familiar with on the lighter side of things, just doesn't work for Class 8. So a lot of it is just old school, market experience and talking to contacts. I have a monthly call with a few different people in the industry just to stay up with what the market's doing. And, typically when I get, a sales report from an independent dealer, sometimes they'll include their market observations for that month too, which is useful. So it's really a short-term forecast what I'm doing. So once I get that month's data processed, which is about, around the middle to end of a given month, then I decide what the values are going to do for the next edition. So forecasting a few weeks in advance, really. Okay,
great. So I guess the obvious question is, what do you see coming up here for 2026, early 2026?
Provide the foundation of how I see market dynamics first, and you can agree or disagree. I'm not going to pretend I'm right, but this is just an observation I've developed. So capacity and active truck utilization are what establish the truck market in a given time. Values are established basically by the relative balance between demand for freight and supply of available trucks. And those are the two ways that we measure both those things, capacity and utilization. So where we are now on those is trending in the right direction. We read the same analysis of the freight market and capacity and truck-based economics that everybody else does. From FTR and ACT are the two companies who I know of that do that. I think FreightWaves does some analysis of those metrics, more focused on the freight side of the market. But between those firms, you have a pretty good idea of what truck capacity is about to do. Those are the sources that we have, so that's what we go by. And looking at those numbers, capacity and utilization are moving in the right direction. The reason I think everybody says third quarter is when we might see a turnaround in the industry is because that's when capacity is forecast to be at critical mass, where the industry has to start acquiring trucks again. So in other words, we're losing enough trucks through replacement and not expansion. We're losing operators pretty steadily out of the industry for various reasons. I mean, mainly it's cyclical. It's, there are some ancillary factors that are going into why operators are leaving. The English language requirement and more difficulty of obtaining a license. Those haven't become super meaningful just yet, but they could have a cumulative impact, as next year unfurls. But cyclically, we were already moving towards an environment where capacity was going to move the freight cycle and the truck acquisition cycle back into the positive place. So, with relatively positive macroeconomic news fairly recently, the last few days, we've seen some more data come out that looked positive. Employment maybe not super strong, but not something to worry about just yet. But consumer spending still holding up. Nobody's afraid to use their credit card still.
Right.
Certainly middle class and above is doing great and spending strongly still. So there are some potential clouds on the horizon. If you're an economic forecaster, you could look at other segments and look at specific segments of the economy and point to these are some negatives that could happen. But if we just rely on the data that we have at this point, things look fairly good for, the consumer, at least those that are purchasing goods that are meaningfully moved by trucks. And certainly finances for fleets and anybody buying, relatively high dollar acquisitions are looking pretty solid too. That's related to the investment markets and the interest rate forecasts to go down instead of up and all that good stuff. So the ingredients are there. The only monkey wrenches potentially, of course, the big ones I forgot to mention, tariffs. We finally got some clarity on that, and I think stability of over the last month or so going into the end of last year. I think, at least from the fleets, at least, seem to be of the mindset that we at least know what we're going to, OEMs and fleets, know what we're going to have to deal with as far as tariffs go. They ended up, to be blunt, Trump's negotiating strategy is to start high and then what's implemented is lower than what's initially mentioned. And that's what happened with tariffs. And then even, regardless of what's happened, who is responsible for the tariffs, they're almost never passed on 100% to the end user anyway, the increased costs. So that's of course the situation here. And there were a bunch of carve-outs for selected industries too. So
right.
For all the valid concern earlier last year, and even going into the end of last year, what we finally got in terms of what the tariff structure looks like now is not the end of the world, and it's manageable. But most importantly, it's a known quantity.
Correct. Yeah, crazy what a year makes, right? That was the big talk going into 2025, and I just listened to a webinar with Craig Fuller here shortly before you and I jumped on this podcast, and he had made a similar analysis that you had just made, that, in the end of the day, the tariffs didn't really necessarily affect the consumer as much as they thought it would. It just maybe drew the consumer back from purchasing, and maybe some of that we see in the new truck orders too, right? Is that a true statement, that maybe that's why the order boards keep, coming up a little short every month?
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that. Caution was the name of the game. But I think December's, unexpectedly for me anyway, December's strong new truck order numbers are probably a reflection of some increased comfort level with the tariff environment. I think it's not a stretch to say that fleets need new equipment. They don't need to expand their fleet, but they do need to replace old equipment, and there was plenty of it out there in use still. So attrition had been taking care of a lot of that. That's why capacity and truck utilization have been, getting tighter. But, you still need relatively late model trucks if you want to have a fleet that's not in the shop all the time. And that's part of the reason why low mileage trucks have remained strong, even though the market had pulled back. Up through mid 2024, that was still the COVID hangover, and that's when the inventory was being moved through the used market, and that's why pricing tanked and all that good stuff. But the exception to that rule was always late model, low mileage trucks. So those are the bright spot, and will continue to be, especially even going forward as this model year, next model year, ever increasing new truck prices. A truck with under 350,000 miles is a pretty attractive substitute for new, especially at upwards of half price now. So.
And I feel like we hear a little bit more talk than we have in the past about extended warranties, those type of programs too, just trying to allow the fleets to run units a little bit longer than they have in the past versus jumping in that trade cycle and having to order new again. But I think you hit on a very valid point. I don't think we see a lot of growth in the freight industry. It's just maybe more a shuffling of just trying to maintain good equipment in the fleet. So whether that's needing to order some new or jumping to the lower model or lower mileage units that are out in the market seems to be a big disparity to some of the maybe 500,000 to 600,000 mile sleeper trucks that we see right now. It just feels like they're kind of in a chasm of their own that the values are very, very unknown to some degree. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's, I love to start talking about the market by talking about the strongest part of the market, because it's always good to start on a happy note.
Right.
When you get into the average mileage stuff, that's when things turn less rosy. That said, if you look at auction pricing, if you don't adjust for inflation, selling prices of trucks at auction, I'm talking about, aerodynamic sleepers, are about where we were in 2018 when the market was strong, pre-COVID, and, quite a bit healthier than about a year later when the market started to tank. Now, of course, if you adjust for inflation, we're about midway between 2018 and 2019. But as far as auction pricing goes, at least, pricing isn't a disaster historically. And I think that's because the market has been operating at a relative equilibrium for at least a year and a half now. When the freight market is stable, used truck supply is the most important factor in, determining the value of a used truck. And that's where we had been. With a relatively stable, I think we got through the COVID hangover in terms of offloading inventory, mid 24. Then after that point, there was a more stability in the returning supply of used trucks, which slowed down depreciation. And there were, some periods where we had no depreciation in late 24. Early 25. Then it went back to, somewhere around 2.5%, which is where we are now, which is perfectly historically normal and what I consider a normally operating market. Now, of course, nobody's happy with the actual dollar value price points that we have now. Everybody would like that to be higher.
Right.
When, depreciation is below 3, it's a relatively smoothly operating market, if not one as healthy as we'd like.
Do you see much variation? I mean, there's a lot of changes in the drivetrain programs with the OEMs bringing in a lot of their own transmissions and components, that kind of thing. Does that create more variation in the percentage than what it has in the past? Do you see that reflected?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've been talking in pretty broad terms, but if we focus into proprietary versus Cummins, Cummins is, we're talking about 13 versus 15 liter first. So to be clear about that. So if we're talking 13 to 15, Cummins has a clear benefit across the board. Doesn't matter what the configuration of truck is. And it's a pretty substantial benefit or premium also for 15. Now that said, there is at least one OEM who has their own proprietary 15 liter engine, and that one performs comparably to Cummins. Yeah. So, I think at this point there were certainly and our proprietary engines that suffer in the marketplace, not just because they're 13-liter, but also because they have some maybe inherent issues that users might not be super hot on. But in general, it's a 13 versus 15-liter situation. And we've got pretty substantial adjustments in our published values to reflect that difference. In terms of demand, if we're talking about the average truck that's out there, a 4-year-old truck with 500,000-600,000 miles on it, but, it's not bringing super strong money to begin with. So if it's got a 13-liter engine in it, it's, got that much more of a challenge in the marketplace. Not saying there's no market for it, just saying it's going to bring lower money than a 15.
Right. No, at the right pricing right now, stuff is moving. I mean, I don't know how many of the higher mileage units you see, but we've noticed that too. If they can pay cash for something that's, in the $35,000 and under area, that it seems to be a desired unit too. They can put some miles on it, make some money, and hopefully upgrade down the road.
True. Yep. What's interesting is right when the COVID hangover pretty much dissipated, 24, started to see a steep decrease in the average age of trucks that were reported sold retail. So, the conclusion I drew from that is the retail buyer really wanted the cleanest trucks available and also the lowest mileage trucks available. And it seemed like the other ones were getting, anything with the older or higher mileage were getting wholesaled out or sent to auction. Now, what you mentioned contradicts that. And I would defer to your experience over mine, but it's probably a reflection of the cross section of dealers that we get. So it could be heavily OEM weighted. Yeah, I would expect that the trucks that are an easier sell from a dollar standpoint would also be doing fairly well too. That's the other end of the market. And especially since we're still rolling in some pretty substantial negative equity, and it's still very difficult to get financing for most single truck buyers. That makes total sense. Yeah.
So kind of going along with that, we've kind of been waiting for this big glut of maybe some repositions and some very heightened levels at the auctions of fleets, basically that can't perform anymore and just were unable to cash flow in that environment here the last couple of years. Do you anticipate any more elevation in that being a activity here in the first quarter, more repossessions and more liquidations?
Yeah, I can't say for sure whether it'll be the first quarter or not, but it'll definitely be a headwind going into in this coming year. We're in 26 already. Yeah, so yeah, I would expect we would see moderate number of those. The finance companies are not stupid. They know that the more they release at one time, the worse it's going to be for the selling prices that they get for their own iron that they're trying to maximize their return on.
Right.
So, they had sat on those trucks for as long as possible, kind of letting the zombie trucker pay whatever he could to keep it on the road so they could avoid repoing it. But yeah, the piper has to come due, has to come calling sooner or later, and we will see some of that this year. Whether that's going to substantively impact selling prices, I don't have enough forecasting knowledge on that to say for sure. It will be a headwind, though.
No, that's fair. That's a good reason for our listeners to stay clued into you and your company, just to see how those changes happen or what they're causing each month. Maybe one other additional question to that. We talk a lot about over-the-road sleeper trucks, but what are you seeing on over-the-road versus like the LTL day cabs? Are you seeing a bigger difference in market pricing there based on age and even on the lower mileage trucks?
Yeah, I think we all saw the day cab market kind of tank 2 years ago or so, and that was just a delayed COVID hangover because just like sleeper trucks, they were, over-purchased going into COVID. But, day cab users typically hold on to those trucks longer than sleeper users. So it just took a little bit longer for day cabs to start hitting the used market in greater numbers. So yeah, we certainly saw that market decrease in starting around 23 going into 24, and they're still depreciating. We might have seen the end of the worst of depreciation from those trucks. But we did have a situation where the sleeper market depreciation recovered a lot faster than the day cab market did. But I think it's more of a delayed. It's just that the day cab market took longer to tank and then level out than the sleeper market did. Proportionally, I think day cabs were probably purchased in slightly greater proportion than they had been pre-COVID, which isn't helping returning supply. So yeah, we hit day cabs as hard as we hit sleepers during the worst of the depreciation.
Is it possible that the reduced production levels is going to maybe favor more volume to the sleepers this last 2 or 3 years than to the day cabs, which could bolster the day cab market maybe down the road a little ways?
Yeah, I mean, the day cab market is operating in its kind of vacuum. There's always some degree of use market for day cabs, even though it's a fraction of what it is for sleepers.
Right.
And that proportion holds true as they moved from being sold new to being in use to being sold through the secondary market. So yeah, the size of the markets are still proportional. Day cabs had a more drastic fall from grace just because that market is so much smaller. Even though there are fewer of them out there, there were more than the market could absorb still. That was the main problem.
That makes sense. So basically, kind of in summary here, I mean, you feel fairly optimistic maybe for the first quarter of the year, maybe that values will hold fairly stable, if I heard you right.
Yeah, the first quarter at least, we shouldn't see heavier than normal depreciation. Haven't seen December's retail numbers yet, but December's not necessarily an overly meaningful month in terms of market direction. So yeah, looking at auction numbers, that they came in at right around 2.5% depreciation. So yeah, and January is a slow month for auctions too. So yeah, if there is a slow month of the year for auctions, it's January. So we probably won't get much knowledge of what is actually happening until next month at the earliest.
Well, stay tuned going into February and keep your ears open. Anything else you want to leave our listeners with, Chris?
Yeah, just a couple things. So keep up with the firms who publish freight spot market analysis. And also, if you don't do that, at least pay attention to what every auction is doing. Because I think those of us who have been through boom and bust cycles have seen truck prices turn on a dime over the course of 1 or 2 auctions. So I remember back in 2015 was the first time I noticed that. It literally took 2 different auctions over the space of 2 weeks for the market to turn pretty dramatically. So keep your eye on auction pricing. I'm not saying that a couple of bad results at one auction means the market is changing, but those same results over 2 auctions or so probably does mean the market is changing. So
that's some good advice there. Yep.
And otherwise, we'll try to reflect all the market observations that we make in our published values going forward.
All right. And what's the best place for our listeners to go and find your information again, Chris?
That would be jdpowervalues.com.
Excellent. Well, as always, Chris, I really appreciate your willingness to work with the UTA, whether it's at convention or dealer group meetings, jumping on the podcast with us. You're just a great advocate for the industry, and we have a lot of respect for what you and your team does. So thank you again for joining us today.
I appreciate that, Steve, and thank you very much for having me.